She died very suddenly, though none of us could have known what lay inside her. Her name was Kimmy Wynn, and she was from Korea or Singapore, somewhere like that. We never learned much about Kimmy. Her family didn't speak very good English, though, but Kimmy spoke it well enough to understand the lessons. We tried to befriend her, but Kimmy was shy, and I'm ashamed to say that we took to bullying her. We were in elementary school and extremely cliquey. Kimmy was an outsider. She wore strange clothes. She didn't speak like we did, and we made fun of her for it. Most days, she just sat in the back of class, sat on the pavilion at recess, and said little to nothing. When she died, it surprised everyone. Kimmy lived in a small apartment complex in a not-so-great part of town. Her family worked for her uncle, Mr. June, who owned a market in the neighborhood they lived in. Kimmy had been working there after school, helping her parents pay the bills, and she'd been making a delivery on her bike when someone had abducted her. They found her bike just sitting on the curb, wheels spinning slowly, and the police didn't seem hopeful in their investigations. Her kidnapping was all the buzz around school, and my friends wanted to talk about little else. Marissa, our sort of leader, said she bet that Kimmy had just made the whole thing up so that people would be friends with her after she was found. Leanna said that she shouldn't say things like that, but you could tell she didn't really feel very scandalized. She said she'd be praying for her, praying that they'd find her safe, but even at 10, I doubted it. I kept my mouth shut on the matter, personally thinking it was terrible. No one should just be grabbed off their bike as they tried to help their family. A week later, they found her body in an empty lot near her uncle's shop. Mom wouldn't let me watch the news report about it, but Marissa said that the newsman had said that she was chopped into little pieces and left there. The news thinks it might have been something to do with her uncle, but they don't seem to know much about it. A service was held for her at the local Korean Baptist church, and I saw a picture of her parents lighting a little paper boat and floating it out for her. Her two sisters, one of whom was in the first grade, were there too, and I remember thinking how awful it would be to lose someone like that. My own sister wasn't very nice, but I still didn't want anything like that to happen to her. A few days later, Miss Hurd stopped me as I was going out to recess and asked if I would put the stuff from Kimmy's desk into a box. Her parents are coming at the end of the day, and I really need to be outside with the other children. Just put it on my desk and come outside when you're done. I saw the pack of Marlboros in her hand and guessed that child-minding probably wasn't the only thing on her mind. Marissa stayed to help me, and I found that Kimmy's desk was surprisingly neat. My desk looked like a garage sale, but Kimmy's desk was very organized, and it was easy to pack her stuff away. Marissa cooed over her Hello Kitty pencil box, but I reminded her that we weren't allowed to take her stuff. The pencil box, her notebooks, her folders, and a cute little art supply case went into the box too, along with a Hello Kitty eraser and a pencil set. Marissa looked over it all greedily, but I wasn't trying to get in trouble for taking anything from a dead student, especially not when the teacher had trusted me to pack it. We were loading some of her notebooks when a small purple book fell out of the middle of them. Marissa pounced on it before I could even fully register what it was. I told her to give it back, that it didn't belong to her, but Marissa was already opening it and leafing through it. "Oh, no way! It's her journal! Give it, Marissa. It isn't yours. We need to put it in the box before someone sees it." "No way. No one knows about it, so who's going to miss it? Unless," Marissa got a mean look on her face, "you're going to tattle on me." I stopped complaining then and let her slide the journal into her pocket. Marissa and I had been friends since first grade, but I hadn't forgotten how mean she could be either. She had bullied me in kindergarten for the better part of the first half of the year, until I'd come to school with a brand new backpack one day, and she had fallen in love with it. Marissa had said someone with a backpack that cool had to be friends with her and Leanna, and I had been part of their clique ever since. That had only been 3 years ago, though, and I wasn't in a big hurry to go back to the way things had been. Marissa and I were friends, but Marissa could be mean when she wanted to be. I won't tattle," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "Good," she said, snatching the pencil case out before I could get the lid on. I set the box on the desk, and I made sure that Marissa was out of the classroom before I left. I didn't want her doubling back to grab anything else out of there. The idea to make the Chatterbox was Marissa's, as so many other bad ideas usually were. She read the journal to us at recess, taking delight every time she or Leanna were mentioned. My name came up a few times, though it was usually by association. It appeared that Kimmy had been keeping a journal of people and how they had wronged her, as well as how they had wronged others. Quite the little spider was Kimmy, hiding away and listening to people as they gossiped or went about their lives. Marissa said, getting a mischievous look. I've got an idea. She turned to the back and tore out an unused page, beginning to write the predictions for her Chatterbox. If you're unfamiliar with the item, it's probably because it has a million names. I've heard them called fortune tellers, whirlybirds, paku-paku, salt sellers, cootie catchers, and any number of other things. Sometimes when I post about them online, I get little fights started over what they're called. People have 1,000 different names for them, but they seem to be something known worldwide. They are little devices that you put numbers in, picking numbers randomly until you get your fortunes and learn your fate. Marissa had already started writing the same old things she always wrote on the wedges anytime she made one of these. They were never very creative, usually things like you'd marry a millionaire, that you'd be a princess, that you'd have 20 children, that sort of thing. She was always very predictable, but she never seemed to include anything bad in her predictions. Marissa, despite being a bit of a brat, didn't like for bad things to happen to her or her friends. When she made the Chatterbox, it was always the best outcomes. Okay, pick a number. I looked at the Chatterbox questioningly. What are you doing? Isn't it obvious? If Kimmy knew so many secrets, then maybe she won't mind telling us our future. The idea of using a dead girl's paper to tell our fortunes made me shudder, and I shook my head as she turned to Leanna. Come on, Lee, let me tell your future. I guess it couldn't hurt, Leanna said. 5. Marissa opened and closed the device very fast, before holding out for her to pick another number. 7, she said, smiling a little as the paper creature plopped open and closed very quickly. 3, she finished, and Marissa opened the flap. You should tell Jana what you... But Marissa stopped suddenly. She seemed to realize that she had read words before she had quite put together what they had said. Tell Jana what? Leanna said, smiling but looking a little nervous. Marissa looked at me. Did you write something on this while I wasn't looking? No. When would I have had a chance? Marissa started to call me a liar, but she huffed out a hey as Leanna took the Chatterbox and looked at the tab. She looked confused when she got the Chatterbox away from her, but she looked angry after she read what was on the tab. You should tell Jana what you did to Mark at the lake. She tossed the little paper thing in Marissa's lap. I told you that in confidence. I only kissed him because you said that I should. Lee, I didn't write that. But Leanna was already storming away, heading for the picnic tables. Marissa looked back at me, holding the paper craft out as though inviting me to take my turn. I don't really want to do it. It feels kind of creepy. Oh my God, Marissa groaned, deep in her throat. Here, I'll do it. She picked numbers at random, moving her fingers very quickly as she selected her fortune. Marissa looked mad, furious even, but that didn't seem to stop her from selecting numbers and finding out what her fortune might be. The fortune that Leanna had read had shocked her, and she was interested in finding the ones that she had written so she could feel okay again. It was a fluke, she must be thinking, and now she was going to prove it. She opened tab number 3, and I could see her hands shaking as she read it. Felicia doesn't like you. She pretended to because her mom asked her to. She looked at me suspiciously, but I just put my hands up and looked at the words inside. It's not even either of our handwritings. Your handwriting is swoopy, and mine is super sloppy. This handwriting is way too neat to be either of ours. Marissa looked at the handwriting, and then flipped open the journal as if looking for the source of it. She stared at a few of the pages before slamming the book shut and taking the Chatterbox with her. I asked her where she was going, but she didn't answer. Turns out she was going on a tour of the playground. I didn't realize what was going on until a group of angry kids approached the playground monitor with a frantic Marissa in tow. The lead girl, Felicia Spaulding, looked livid, and Marissa was trying to tell her how sorry she was with every step she took. Miss Conway, Marissa's telling lies about my friends and me. Miss Conway, a broad, beefy, grandmotherly woman with hands like slabs of meat, looked at Marissa and then back to Felicia. What's going on, girls? What's this about lies? I didn't write it, Marissa wailed, waving the chatterbox with her free hand. She wrote lies about us in her chatterbox. Her box said that my mom had gotten an abortion and that Cindy was adopted. Cindy, the tall girl with the wavy brown hair that hung with Felicia in her clique, was crying and shaking her head. Other kids had similar stories. Some said that her chatterbox had told them that their parents were getting divorced. Others said that it had said it knew things that they had done or things they had said. One of them even claimed that it told him that his aunt would die later that week and that she was in the hospital with cancer. Marissa, hand that thing over, Miss Conway said, her face growing dour as she listened to the long list of complaints against Marissa. Marissa gave her the folded paper, both hesitant and loath to be rid of it, and she almost cried out in anguish as Miss Conway tore it into pieces. Next time I hear of something like this, I'll give you after-school detention. Stop writing lies about people, and the rest of you go play. They all dispersed, Marissa looking down at the pieces of the chatterbox as they drifted in the wind. I hadn't walked up with the rest, but I was still close enough to hear Felicia tell her not to expect to go to any of her parties anymore. Marissa changed after that, and it seemed to me that the chatterbox was the reason for it. For the rest of the day, she just sat at her desk and looked down at her lap. I couldn't see what she was fiddling with at first, but eventually I saw it was another one of the chatterboxes. I was shocked. Hadn't she learned her lesson after the first one? Her book was open, but her hands moved below the lip of the desk in a rapid series of jerks and swoops. She would flick it once, twice, 3 times before opening the corresponding flap and reading what it said. Every answer seemed to make her more and more agitated. She would take it off her hands sometimes and seemed on the verge of ripping it to shreds before gently sliding it back on and starting again. Marissa, would you care to answer number 4 for us? Miss Hurd asked, drawing my attention back to the front of the class and drawing Marissa out of her stupor. Marissa shoved the chatterbox under her desk and looked down at her open textbook as she searched for number 4. 17? Miss Hurd blinked. That would be correct if we were still on our math lesson. We've moved on to geography. Are you feeling well, Marissa? You don't seem like yourself today. Marissa turned beet red, digging through her desk to find her book. Miss Hurd had approached her desk, I suppose wanting to see if she might be feverish, and when she stooped to pick something up, I saw that the chatterbox had tumbled out of her desk as Marissa looked for her book. Oh, what have we here? I remember these from when I was a little girl. We used to use them to tell each other's fortunes. I can't believe kids still make these for... But as she had been talking, she had opened one of the flaps on the chatterbox. She glanced at the tab as it came fully open, and her words ended as abruptly as they had begun. Marissa looked up at her as her geography book came open, and the look on her face was enough to tell me that she didn't like what she saw there. Get up, Miss Hurd whispered, her voice barely containing her rage. Miss Hurd? Marissa asked, unsure what was happening. Get your... She curbed her next words. Things, and come with me. We're going straight to the principal's office, young lady. Marissa looked up, confused, but collected her things and went with Miss Hurd to the office. She never came back to class, and when I asked Miss Hurd, she only told me that her mother had been called after something she had written in the chatterbox. Marissa was suspended for 5 days. She was taken out of class and put in another 4th grade class, away from Leanna and I. Leanna said it served her right for writing lies about people. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it. I would have honestly forgiven her, but not after what she said about Miss Hurd. I asked her what she had said, and Leanna leaned in like it was some big secret. I heard that she had written that Miss Hurd was cheating on her husband with Mr. Sizemore. The PE teacher? Yeah, can you imagine? She's lucky she didn't get expelled. When Marissa came back to school, she was a very different girl. She looked frazzled, her red hair looking unkempt. She seemed to be constantly pulling at her clothes. She was nervous and twitchy, and she seemed obsessed with the little chatterbox. She would ask people to pick a space, ask them to make a choice, but most people would just walk past her without speaking. It's tough to be labeled a social pariah at 10 years old. She had lost all of her friends, except for me, and I wasn't even sure I still wanted to be her friend. When I saw her at recess that day, sitting by the fence and fiddling with the Chatterbox, I sat beside her and asked if she was okay. I could smell a smell around her, and it wasn't an altogether healthy smell. "I can't let her beat me," she whispered, her face very close to the Chatterbox as she worked the mechanism. "Who?" I asked. "Kimmy," she said, just as low, and when she opened the fold on the Chatterbox, she sobbed and closed it again before starting. "Mara, Kimmy's dead," I said, using her nickname to try to bring her back to her senses. "Not all the way dead," she said, and when she opened the tab this time, her fingers crumpled the space, and I could read the message written there just before she closed it. "Your mother thinks you're crazy." Marissa pushed me suddenly, and the fence scratched my back as I slid sideways. Through the tears that welled in my eyes, I could see her lunatic's face as she pushed it inches from mine. "That's not your fortune. Don't read other people's fortunes." Miss Conway must have seen something, because she started walking over. I got up and walked away quickly, not looking at Marissa as the playground monitor approached her. That was the last time I spoke to Marissa, but not the last time I saw her. For the next 3 months, I saw her on and off. She became like a wraith who haunted the school. She stopped asking people to look at the Chatterbox. She just sat off by herself and played with it, cringing and sobbing every time she opened a flap. The more I saw her, the worse I felt for her, and eventually I decided to try and bury the hatchet. I decided that after school I would go visit her at home and try to see if we could reconcile. I also wanted to see if there was any sanity left in her to save. She hadn't been at school the last couple of days, not that anyone but me had bothered to notice. When I arrived at her house, her mother seemed happy to see me. She told me that Marissa had been feeling poorly lately, and that maybe a friend might cheer her up. Marissa's mother looked like she hadn't slept in a few days, and even at 10, I noticed that she approached Marissa's room like there might be a wild animal behind the door. She knocked, slow and hesitant, and told Marissa that I was here to see her. Marissa said nothing. She knocked again, asking if Marissa was awake. Marissa said nothing. Her mother opened the door slowly, and I could see Marissa sitting at the desk with her back to the door. She never moved when her mother walked over to her, and as I stood in the doorway, I couldn't help but take in what appeared to be the lair of a crazy person. Some of the details would come to me afterward, but many of them were seen in the split second that we often use to see details and assess if a person is a threat or not. The floor was full of chatterboxes, like a flower bed of folded paper, and her mother seemed to be stepping over them gingerly. The outside of them were covered with words, all of them written in that neat, spidery handwriting. The writing on the wall was all Marissa's, though. She had written on the wall in anything she could find. The scrawls were a messy jumble of pen, pencil, paint, charcoal, and even rusty red colors that might have been her own blood in a few places. The words were strange, not making a lot of sense. She watches. She whispers. She tells me I'm crazy. I'm insane. I'm a disappointment. She haunts me. Most chilling of all was the rusty red smear of the word Kimmy over the head of her bed, like she had traced it with a bleeding finger. When her mother started to scream, I was turned away from the bloody words as if someone had slapped me. She was screaming Marissa's name again and again, shaking the ragged scarecrow that she had become. She begged me to dial 911, and I ran downstairs to do just that. The paramedics couldn't figure it out. They said it was like her heart had just stopped, and no amount of CPR or defibrillation could bring her back. As they laid her out on the ground, I could see her face frozen in a rictus of fear and shock. Looking to the desk, I saw the chatterbox she had been toting around. It was grimy, covered in fingerprints, but I believe to this day that it was the same one that Miss Conway had destroyed all those weeks ago. The open flap was blank, the surface stark and unmarred. I can't imagine what she could have read there, and I honestly didn't want to find out. I'm in high school now. 8 years have passed, but I still remember the lesson I learned from Marissa. It's unwise to mess around with the possessions of the dead. Their things are better left undisturbed, their memories left unread. It was the last lesson Marissa would ever learn, and she learned it too late. If it's a lesson I ever forget, I have a reminder on my desk every day. You see, when I came home from Marissa's funeral, the Chatterbox was sitting on my doorstep. I can't prove it was the same one. I know that it can't be the same one, but that didn't stop me from scooping it up and putting it in my pocket before my mother could see it. I heard it whisper to me that night. Its whispering is little more than a mutter as I sit here writing. It's harder to hear, but it never goes away. That's why I refuse to touch it, let alone use it. Let Marissa and Kimmy keep each other company inside that thing for the rest of time, for all I care. I don't want the knowledge they hold that badly. I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release, so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison. I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. Yeah, sorry, we filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job. I gritted my teeth and resist the urge to rage at him. Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back? 'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it. I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today. I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant, the kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from." He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon. It was an old two-story with a peeling exterior and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first. I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing. I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot. Like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking, a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you, not just half-assing it like you did today. I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Drac said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone. When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly, I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was..." "Jack, you gotta get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I had gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. "Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find." That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out. "If walls could talk," Joshua mumbled under his breath as he walked through the ancient old arches of the hotel. Approaching the wide check-in desk was like stepping back in time, but the image was ruined by the girl with her phone out and her AirPods stuffed in her ears. She was smacking her gum and perusing Face Space or Tic Tacs or whatever people her age did. Joshua hadn't really had time for any of that in a while. He hadn't seemed to have much time for anything these days. The girl at the desk looked young enough to be his daughter, and her smile was that perfect mix of customer service charm and barely masked indifference. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" Joshua looked up at her, and she must have seen something that spooked her in his hollow eyes, because he saw some of that indifference slip into something resembling concern. Not concern for him. That would have been a little too genuine an emotion to show a stranger. She was concerned that he might be a weirdo. She had clearly been warned about spotting weirdos. The hotel likely got its share of rent and ditchers, or guys who wound up naked in the hot tub at 3 a.m., and she was on the lookout for trouble before it reared its head. The hotel manager likely had them keeping an eye out for these sort of weirdos who wanted to become permanent residents. If she saw that on his face, he knew he'd be screwed. Joshua tried to fix his face, but it was a struggle. "Checking in," he said, handing her his credit card and reservation paperwork. She looked at the paperwork as if the concept were foreign to her, before turning to the computer and clicking away at the register. He figured it was likely something that she didn't deal with regularly. The Leaser Moor was not some posh establishment, not some trendy spot that housed celebrities or jet-setters. It was an old hotel that attracted tourists and people who liked to bask in historic places. That's why Susan had come here, after all. She'd been here to photograph the hotel for a travel magazine, her 4th assignment as a freelancer, and her last. She pulled him up, and Joshua saw her bite her lip when the room number popped up. "Ooh, that's gotta be a mistake. Sorry, sir, but that room isn't one we usually rent out." "I'm aware. That's why I requested it." She looked shocked, like she didn't know what to say. "I hate to tell you this, but someone went missing in there pretty recently." She had pitched her voice low like it was a rat problem, or some mold that could have been steam cleaned out. Joshua wanted to be angry. He wanted to tell her that he knew someone had gone missing in there, and that 6 months and 5 days wasn't recent to him. 6 months and 5 days was when his world had crumbled, and it was a day he would never forget. He wanted to tell her that his wife had not been some rat infestation or a mold colony that could be cleaned, poisoned, or time erased. He wanted to tell her all these things in a flurry of anger and hatred, but he knew she wouldn't understand. "I've been informed. I like to stay in rooms like that and try to gauge paranormal happenings. It's a hobby of mine. Since I was in the city anyway, I figured I would take that room." The young woman sighed as she finished checking him in. "That's good. She just thought he was a weirdo." Weirdo was fine. A weirdo might set up some cameras, pull out a ghost box or an Ouija board, light some candles, and pretend to be a ghostbuster or a medium for a few days before leaving. One look at the suitcase probably told her that he had brought all his toys with him so he could play pretend, but she had no idea what games he intended to play. There was only one tool in that bag, and it wasn't for playing. "And you're all set," she said, handing him his key card. "Please enjoy your stay at the Leaser Moor." Her smile was back, that fabricated grin that hid her disinterest. She just wanted him to leave so she could get back to Snapchatting or Twittering or whatever she was doing. She'd have something to tell her friends about tomorrow when she came in for her morning shift and heard about the mess he'd left in his room. Joshua pushed the button for the elevator and rode it up to the 7th floor. The hallway was done in that early 80s cinema style that made you think the floor was furry or sticky. The carpet pattern shifted in slightly nauseating diamonds as he walked down the hall towards his room. The thought that this would be the last thing he ever saw was a little disappointing, but that was reality. With any luck, his daughter wouldn't get his letter until Monday, not unless the post office near the college was feeling excessively ambitious. It would be too late for him to stop him either way. Joshua had laid out everything he needed to, explaining that he couldn't live without her mother, and that if her spirit resided somewhere in this room, he wanted to be with her. She could have his money, his savings, the car, the house, and anything else he owned, so she could finish school and make something of herself. All he wanted was Susan. He came to the door of room 712 much too soon, and as he slid the key into the lock, he glanced at the room where his wife had spent her last few hours of life. As the door came open, he was a little disappointed to find that it was just another bland hotel room. 2 beds, a dresser, an old TV that looked ready for the dump, a flimsy-looking chair, a nightstand that doubtlessly held a Bible, and the wall, whose color scheme sat somewhere between warm brown sugar and runny crap. Had this really been Susan's final destination? Had these uninteresting walls been the last thing she'd seen before leaving this room for the last time? Joshua set his suitcase down and took a seat on the bed, suddenly hoping not. Let her have seen the sights, taken a meal, and taken her final breath anywhere but here. The sun set outside the window as he sat on the bed, casting shadows across the room. As the darkness came to fill the empty space, Joshua became aware of strange patterns on the wall. The smears seemed to move as the shadows became gantries, and some looked eerily like faces. Suddenly the room was far too crowded, the multitudes watching him from the walls of the room, their judgment palpable. Joshua could hear the nightlife waking up, the people rumbling from the street below as the cabs and the music created a strange cacophony. He opened the suitcase and pulled out the gun, deciding that this would be a fine time to do it. Every minute he put it off was another chance for something to go wrong. It also gave his courage a chance to slip. If Kara got the letter and he couldn't follow through, he'd be spending the foreseeable future in a mental facility. Having to sit in the sterile room on a paper gown, orderlies medicating him to the point of catatonia, would be worse than death. As he set the cold barrel against his head, he whispered a final apology to Susan as his finger hovered over the trigger. "Stop!" It took every ounce of trigger control not to blow the top of his head off by accident. Joshua turned, his eyes growing wide as he recognized the face that had yelled at him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, a ghost or a manifestation, or maybe just a final mental break that would prove less supernatural and more existential. But he never expected to see one of the slightly expressive wall faces staring at him with panic. It reminded him of a mannequin's face, featureless and barely expressive, but as he watched it, it spoke again, and he heard the voice of his dead wife coming from the bland wallpaper. "Please, I can't watch you kill yourself." Joshua crawled across the bed, his shocked face locked onto the unremarkable one looking at him from the wall. "Susan?" The eyeless face stared at him as he got closer, and despite being devoid of anything remotely close to features, he began to see his dead wife's face beneath it. The scar on her cheek that she'd gotten in high school, the small nose he'd loved to kiss the tip of, the eyes that were slightly too close together, her lips that looked just as full and sensuous as they had before she'd left. The closer he looked, the more he saw. The more he saw, the closer he came. Is it you?" "It is," she said, the corner of her mouth pulling up as she studied him. "It's good to see you." "But how?" he said, stuttering as he leaned off the bed, closer and closer to that wall of perpetual faces. I don't know," she whispered, her lips forming the words delicately. "I woke up to see a face on the wall looking back at me, and as we stared at each other, it began to speak." He leaned in closer, slipping off the bed as his knees brought him closer to the spot on the wall where Susan's face lay. He asked what I was doing in his room, and after I explained that I had rented it from the hotel, he told me how he was staying here on a business trip when he had seen the faces as well. They all live here, Josh. Once I became part of them, I got to know them and heard their stories. They were all once people who stayed in this very room, people on vacation, people on business, people with families, people estranged, all seeking purpose in something and finding it here. Joshua crawled on his knees like a penitent before an idol, but his mind demanded caution. The other faces were looking at him, pushing against the wall like someone behind a thick plastic sheet as they tried to break free. Joshua could see their multitudes in the dim light from the window as they pressed and receded like a tide. "Come closer, dear. It's hard to talk through this veil." He obliged, now halfway between the bed and the wall. He wanted to turn on the lights and take a better look at her face, but he was afraid that the light might ruin it. Hadn't he failed to see it until dark? He'd been sitting in this room for hours, waiting for the right time to join her. Now, here she was, coming to him in his time of need. "Wait for me, please. I'll join you. I don't want to live without you, Susan. My life is meaningless without you. Can you take me where you are? Is there some way?" "I want to apologize," she whispered, and Joshua came a little closer as her words were lost in the blare of a car horn. You have nothing to apologize for. You didn't ask to leave me. I came here to join you, to see if your spirit lingered here and I could find you once I passed on. Kara's grown. She doesn't need me. But I need you." He was closer now, and if he had reached out, he could have almost touched that porcelain face. The live wire in his head, however, that ancient alarm that warns of danger, just wouldn't stop going off, and his hands trembled as he tried to make them reach. "Not for that. I want to apologize for what I did while I was here." He felt his breath stick in his throat, his next words held in check as he waited for her to go on. In spite of himself, he crawled a little closer. "When the faces woke me up, I wasn't in bed alone. I had gone to see the nightlife, to see the city, and as I sat in one of the trendy bars, I met someone. He was charming, a real ladies' man, and one thing led to another, and I let him convince me to take him back to my hotel room. I could blame it on the wine, but I know that wasn't all of it. I was bored, dear. I felt trapped by our life, smothered by what we had built, and that's why I agreed to the job in the first place. I wanted something new, something different, and though I didn't set out to find someone else, I ended up being untrue to you." Joshua felt the ice slithering into his heart, his lungs seething as his body shook with effort. He was drowning, he was suffocating, his body refusing to draw breath. How could she do this to him? This couldn't be true. Something was messing with him. This couldn't be his wife. She would never do that. She couldn't. Even though he was left breathless by her secret, his knees still carried him forward. Please say something. Can you forgive me? It was a lapse in judgment. I'm sorry." "I don't care," he rasped. "I don't care what you've done. I forgive you. I want to be with you again." His hands slid around the edges of the mask, caressing her face as he leaned in close. "Please don't leave me. I can't live without you." He leaned his head against her mask and felt her perfect lips turn up in a smile. "Then let us never be parted again, my love." He felt her lips twist into a smile, too large for a human mouth to contain. The corners tore, her cheeks splitting as her mouth opened wide like a snake. He didn't struggle as her mouth enveloped him, the face elongating as she pulled him in. He opened his eyes to see that her face had grown to take in the whole wall. Her features had warped into something akin to the face of one of the demonic statues you saw in churches sometimes, and it warped and tilted oddly on that flat plane. "You aren't really my wife, are you?" "No, but I can take you to her. You'll find many of her friends inside the walls." "I hate going into this room," Maria said, her cart making a strangely chuffy noise on the carpet as she and Loa came inside. "Why? It's no different from any other room. It just always seems like something is watching me here." As she fixed the bed, Maria couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at the wall. Loa was wrong. This room was unlike anything in the hotel. The paint here always looked like faces, and the faces were always staring right at her when she came in to clean. As she looked at the wall, the paint looked thick in places, like a splash of blood left to dry. The faces leered at her from every corner, and she squinted a little as she noticed a new one. She cleaned this room once a day. The 7th floor was her assigned floor, after all, and she could have sworn that no face had been in that spot before. As she watched, it almost seemed to turn to her, the featureless face somehow regarding her. "Hello?" it rasped, its voice thick and coarse, but also inviting as it fell over her like a... "Did you say something, Maria?" Loa asked, and the little maid shook herself as she turned away from the wall. When she glanced back, the face was still there, but had become flat and featureless again. "Let's get out of here," she said suddenly, taking her cart and pushing it towards the door. "But we haven't cleaned the room yet," Loa countered, looking aghast as Maria beat a hasty retreat. Maria took the Do Not Disturb sign from behind the door and hung it on the knob. "We can clean tomorrow. No one will bother this room if that sign's on the door." She was glad to see Loa coming behind her, but she glanced back at the face as it regarded her from the doorway. She prayed she would have the strength to turn away tomorrow, but she knew that someday her own face might look down from that same wall. Maybe it wouldn't seem like such a bad idea on that day.
Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Sorry to butt in at the start of the story, but I thought I'd tell you that tonight's story is going to be a bit of a two-parter. You see, the story I wrote after this one is kind of a sequel to a story that never quite made it on this channel, so I thought I'd let you know that it's probably going to be a little bit longer. So, if you need to go make yourself a drink, a sandwich, maybe sit down with one of my books, before you listen, get yourself ready. That would be fantastic. Might I suggest my latest book, Dark Journeys, which is now available on Amazon. There's a link below if you'd like to come check it out. And now, on to tonight's story. I was drinking with some friends a few nights ago, swapping stories from old times, when my old roommate reminded me of these guys I used to hang out with. Or, as he put it, that time you hung out with those crazy pagans out in the woods. The crazy pagans in question were a coven I crossed paths with while living in North Georgia. No one tells you when you move here that there are a lot of non-Christian communes in the North Georgia hills, and given my interests, I ran into a lot of them. I've met pagans, druids, Wiccans, and many other practitioners of strange and foreign beliefs. Most are just hobbyists, people with a passing interest who find the mystic section of Barnes & Noble and go a little nuts. However, some of these guys take this stuff very seriously, and sometimes they take it a little too far. This story is about one of those groups. I had taken a semester of religious studies, and it had led me down a rabbit hole that had led me to a general interest in occult and mysticism. This led to a lot of brooding in the back of my college library, reading over old books, and making notes on strange subjects and odd topics. I had taken an interest in runes, and that was how I met Patrick, or Wormwood as he was calling himself in those days. He was teaching me about runes in exchange for some notes I'd made on energy exchange. We became friends and started hanging out a bit at a coffee shop in Dahlonega that catered to our sort of crowd. That was how I met Amadeus. Now, as enamored as I was with the idea of mysticism, Amadeus was still a little weird. I arrived to meet with Patrick one day to find a man in his mid-40s sitting next to him. His gray hair was braided down his back, his bald crown was oiled and gleaming, and he wore an honest-to-God traveling cloak, not one of those Hot Topic long coats that his crowd usually wore. His shirt was obscured with silver charms hung on long leather thongs about his neck, and he stared at me as he sat, fingers steepled across his eyes in a decidedly wizard fashion. He began following very probing questions at me before Patrick could make introductions. He wanted to know what I knew about everything from runes to tarot to demonology to herbcraft and everything in between. I was studied in quite a few subjects and was happy to flex my knowledge for him, so we spent about an hour talking shop. If I'd known what he wanted, I'd have left right then. He must have been impressed with what I had to say. "You seem pretty knowledgeable. It appears that Wormwood did not exaggerate your abilities. I'm looking for someone to come into the woods with us for a gathering. I need someone capable of setting up and maintaining a protective circle around our campsite, and to act as a guide while we await the spirits. I'm willing to pay if you're willing to come out for the weekend." We talked a little bit about what was expected, and we came to an arrangement. I would set up his protective circle, provide scholarly advice, and keep them from wandering off into the woods in the event that something took notice of our gathering. This would be a standard gathering for them, some 30-odd members of their coven coming together, and Amadeus was pretty clear that this was likely to get rowdy. He would give me $250 today, and another $250 at the end of the weekend. As a poor college student, it sounded pretty good to me. I had done similar things before, setting up circles and safeguarding people. Sounded like an easy $500 at the time. I took his money and set about getting a few things together for that weekend. I'd need a few things to pull this off, but honestly, I wasn't expecting much more than some drinking in the woods and a bit of babysitting. By Friday, I had assembled my components and made my way to the agreed-upon spot. They had decided not to use an established campground, but instead had decided to camp in a section of the wood they claimed to have heard about from someone in our circle. I arrived to find about 6 other vehicles down an access road, most of them old vans. Just as I was wandering off into the woods, however, one of the doors slid open and out popped a short blonde woman in a homemade dress. I say short, but she was probably about 5'2", with a long spill of silver blonde hair. She asked my name, and I told her, and she told me hers was Andromeda, but I could call her Angie. She was going to be my guide for the weekend. Amadeus said I should keep an eye out for you. I'm to assist you in anything you might need this weekend. That should have been a huge red flag, but I kind of shrugged it off at the time. Angie led the way, and we walked about a mile into the woods. She chattered all the way about how much she had been looking forward to this weekend. She said that Amadeus had been researching this area and thought that it was a good spot for communing with spirits. The area was reputed for sightings, and the coven was hopeful they could make contact with whatever lived in these woods. They kept saying coven, but as the campsite came into view, I was beginning to wonder if cult wasn't a better word. The clearing was a circle, 30 feet wide, with about 12 tents set up inside. The forest loomed around the campsite, and the old forest seemed to resent having a section of itself gouged out so people could camp. At the center of the tents was a fire pit, a big one, with a lot of styrofoam coolers sitting around it. I could see people bustling about the campsite, making adjustments to tents and setting up sleeping bags. Angie led me to the fire pit where Amadeus was reading a book and smoking what smelled like a joint. He looked at my duffel bag and asked if I'd brought enough supplies to put a circle around the whole campsite. I told him I had, but I was already doing the math and realizing the sage I had brought would go quickly. He nodded and told me there were supplies in his tent if I needed them. He told me also that Angie was going to work with me this weekend. "Use her in any capacity you see fit," he said, and a lecherous grin spread across his face that was hard to miss. That was red flag number 2. Seeing as most of his coven members were women, I was beginning to get a pretty good idea about what sort of setup I had stumbled across. I felt a little squeamy about it, but if they were comfortable with it, then who was I to judge? I had already decided what capacity I would use Angie in this weekend, and whatever ideas Amadeus had didn't figure into them. I wasn't opposed to sleeping with women I'd just met, but the idea of sleeping with someone who might not be 100% on board with it was a non-starter for me. I told him I needed to set up my tent, but it was quickly whisked away by a pair of women in homespun dresses, who started setting it up near Amadeus's large, ornate tent. So instead, Angie and I set about setting up the protective circle. I won't bore you with the details. My process probably wouldn't work for you anyway. We set about digging a small trench around the campsite and filled it with items I would use to seal the circle. If this sounds dumb to you, it sounds pretty dumb to me too. When I look back on it through the lens of time, I realize I was no less deluded than the rest of them. But that kind of code of silence with these communities is pretty common. Even if you think someone is full of shit, you keep your mouth shut, because you don't want them to call you on your bullshit. If you're lucky, you grow out of it. If you're not, you become like Amadeus and his little harem. Hopefully not literally, though. By the time we finished, I was sweaty and ready to settle down for the night. Angie had been a pretty big help, and as we talked, I learned that she'd been with the community for about 7 years. One of the women, whose hair was very similar to Angie's, kept bringing us water, and I started to suspect that she might be Angie's mom. We set up the ingredients, and as we finished, I instructed her to start lighting the sage bundles. I had placed them every few feet. Once they were smoking, I lit the sticks and leaves that I had put in there too, and hoped they would create a smoldering circle that would last until morning. When we stepped back inside, I spoke some pseudo-Latin, made some more vaguely mystic hand gestures, and declared the circle closed. That seemed to be enough for the coven, and they began to set up around the fire pit. The coolers, as it turned out, were full of beer. The women brought out a large pot full of soup makings and set it on a hanger over the fire. Amadeus brought out a trunk from his tent, and I saw him pass out baggies of what I assumed were drugs. Mushrooms seemed to be the drug of choice, but there were a lot of people lighting pipes, and more than one person I saw snorting something off the back of their hand. A group of young men were listening to Amadeus wax philosophical, and he leaned over to let me know that my secondary duties for the evening were about to begin. I sighed. I guess I was on guide duty then. I'd played the guide before at gatherings like this, and it was rarely fun once people started using drugs and getting drunk. I guess designated adult sounds less fun than guide, but that was essentially what I was there to do. My job was to make sure that no one wandered off into the woods, no one slept on their back and drowned in their own vomit, and no one tried to jump into the fire. Amadeus and his flock drank heavily and used heartily, but I was surprised at how tame the gathering was. Amadeus and about 5 or 6 young men were pretty much waited on hand and foot by the 24 women, and Angie seemed to think it was her job to do the same for me. I had soup when I wanted it, despite me telling her I could get it myself. She also intercepted anyone who tried to offer me a beer or a drug and kept a bottle of water close at my hand. She helped me with the 2 or 3 times I needed to help someone from tripping over the circle, and she was a delight to talk with. She was knowledgeable about a lot of the things that I was interested in, and I found myself having a good time, despite being an outsider in what was likely a cult gathering. I was just about to make a Kool-Aid joke when the soup pot was taken away, and 3 women carried out a heavy iron vessel that they hung in its place. It was ugly and ill-made, not the beautiful thing you usually think of for these sorts of things. It looked like a big teapot, so much as anything, and the women started shoving bundles of herbs into the top of it. I had no idea what kind of herbs they were, and when I asked, Amadeus, he just winked and tittered. I told him if they were planning to flood the campsite with smoke, I wouldn't be able to guide them if I was under the influence of whatever he was putting in that pot. He snorted. "These herbs are not for us. This is smoke to entice the spirits." He called everyone close and set them around the fire as the kettle began to heat up and the smoke started creeping out. "Good evening, my children. The meal has been eaten and the circle has been set by our most generous guide. What followed was a scattering of applause, and I nodded half-heartedly. "Now, for the reason we are all here. The smoke will attract the spirits that dwell in this forest, and we will be free to view them from a safe distance as they are unable to cross our barrier." The smoke had begun to increase a bit, and I could see it making its way up the spout and across the campsite. It smelled terrible, like burning syrup, but it didn't seem to be having much of an effect on anyone. Most of them were already tripping on mushrooms or any number of other things, and the smoke did little more than make them wrinkle their noses. As it began to bellow out, the herbs catching fire, Amadeus continued to talk about philosophy and magic and a good number of other things. His followers sat dutifully, hanging on his every word, and I tried to be polite as I checked my phone to see if I had any service. To no one's surprise, I had no bars, so I put it away and tried to act interested in Amadeus's impromptu TED Talk. As I listened, though, I started hearing noises in the woods. The smoke was pretty thick by then, Amadeus giving his dissertation in a fog bank, and I started hearing noises. I mentioned this to Amadeus, and he got pretty excited. He instructed his followers to start chanting. He took it up first, and they started copying him in a shaky, undulating tone. I got up and went to the edge of the circle, kind of figuring the smoke had upset some of the natural wildlife, and I wanted to see what we had attracted the attention of. It was midsummer, and the idea that we had pissed off a bear or a small group of coyotes or feral dogs was not outside the realm of possibility. I stood at the edge of the circle, not wanting to break it and mess up whatever protective magic I had going on, and I squinted out into the dark woods. Now, if you've never been camping out in the real woods, the first thing you come to realize is that it's really dark out there. I know that sounds obvious, but it's a different kind of dark than the normal city dark. The woods really only have to deal with the intrusion of the moon at night, and with the campfire starting to come down off its normal roar, it was pretty dark outside the circle I had made. I squinted and looked, but honestly, a bear could have swiped my face off before I saw him. I could hear something crunching around out there, something that sounded big. I returned to the fire, the flock still chanting and undulating, and I could hear the crunching noises coming from several points at once. "He has heard our call!" Amadeus rejoiced. That was when the trees started shaking. Out in the woods, I could see the shadows of trees being shaken and pushed violently. Limbs were snapped all over the place, and as they shook, there was an underlying sound accompanying it. Something was scraping the tree bark, peeling it away angrily as whatever it was, whatever they were, kept battering the trees around the campsite. I say they, because it wasn't just one tree that was shaking. It was 2, then 3, then 7, and before long, it seemed like the whole forest was trying to get up and leave. Above the sound of shaking trees and snapping limbs, I could hear animal sounds too. I could hear dogs and cats and birds, the grunt of deer, the growl of a bear, the snort of horses, and all of it around the campsite. I've been present for some weird stuff that makes me feel pretty secure in the belief that something was out there. But this was different. This was downright terrifying. The flock, however, was in ecstasy. This is apparently what they had wanted, what they had been waiting for, and they quickly moved to the edge of the circle so they could see what was out there. I, however, went back to my tent to get something out of my duffel bag. I was kind of done with this. The magic had gotten pretty real pretty quick, and I wanted to see what exactly was out there. I still figured our smoke had pissed off a herd of deer or maybe a wild dog pack, maybe even a bear, and I didn't want to suddenly become dinner for something big and angry. I had packed a deer spotting light that my dad had given me for Christmas, and I wanted to know right now what was out there making all that racket. When I came out with it, I lit up a big section of woods and started hunting. One of the boys that had been sitting with Amadeus slapped it out of my hand after about 20 seconds. But honestly, that was about 15 seconds longer than I needed. When the light fell on a deer, I almost breathed a sigh of relief. Well, not a deer. Not really. It had antlers, so I guessed it was actually a buck. The antlers, however, were long. The tines sort of wound together like vines. It was up on its hind legs, scraping its hooves against the tree in a way that I thought was kind of strange for a deer. I had heard of young bucks rubbing their antlers against the trees, mostly to get the velvet off or to scratch an itch, but I had never heard of them rubbing their hooves against the tree. When it turned its head to look at me, Its eyes glowed like a dog's in a camera flash. When it turned its head, I could see that half of the velvety skin was torn, showing the muscles of its face and the bone beneath. I took all this in before the light was slapped out of my hand, and I backed away from the circle, suddenly wanting none of this. People were standing around the edges of the circle, and as I backed away, I saw someone step over the trench and walk into the woods. Others followed suit, stepping into the ditch and snuffing out the sage. This would create a hole in the circle. This would allow whatever that was to come into our campsite. In my mind, we were breached already, and this job had just become pretty dangerous. I am completely unashamed to say that I went to my tent, dug the padlock out, padlocked my tent from the inside, and stayed there until morning. As I pulled the sleeping bag up around me, I could hear people outside the tent. From the dancing fire pit, I could see the shadows of things in the campsite as well. Some of them were on 2 feet, but some of them were walking on 4 feet. Some of the people out there were laughing, others were crying, some were definitely screaming as they plunged into the dark woods. I shivered with fear till morning, and when the sun came up, I collected my things and got out. The campsite wasn't some sacrificial pit, though. I could see people lying around the campsite in various states of undress, and the area around the bonfire was trashed. Coolers were smashed, beer cans were stomped and torn, and vegetables and food packages were strewn everywhere. Of Amadeus, there was no sign. I never saw him again, and Patrick said no one had heard from him after that night. His coven dissipated after that, and I never heard from any of them ever again. I was never paid the other half of my fee, but I suppose that was fitting. I had failed to guide them, and the ritual had gone astray. All I know is I ran the mile back to my car and never looked back. I did a little research on my own when I got home. Turns out there have been a lot of weird happenings in those woods. People have reported seeing lights in the sky, hearing strange noises, hearing animals that aren't native to the region, and a feeling of overall dread felt by those who stay there overnight. People have gone missing in those woods too, and authorities have never found a trace of them. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I had some kind of paranormal experience out there. I'm not going to tell you that I saw a skinwalker, or a wendigo, or an alien, or anything like that. I'm not going to tell you that I saw a ghost, or a cryptid, or any of that either. What likely happened was that Amadeus was burning some kind of psychotropic drugs in a kettle, and we all experienced some kind of group hallucination out there. These are the things that I saw, and these are the things that I told my friends as we sat drinking around our yearly bonfire that night. After I told them my story, more than a few of them moved inside. I guess maybe the dark outside the cabin was a little too dark for them now.
Madge, these paintings are stupendous. How do you do it? We were standing in Marjorie's home studio, looking over her latest art piece. Madge and I had met in college, and she was an accomplished artist even then. She'd come a long way from opening the tiny student center auditorium at our college, and now she had her own gallery in the village, where most of her artwork was displayed. I'd always loved her eye for detail, but this was better than anything I'd ever seen. This was next level, so beyond anything, and I was just astonished at how far my friend had come. Madge laughed, swirling her wine as she looked lovingly at her latest piece. It really is. I've had offers already, and it hasn't even been shown anywhere besides my little spot in the village. I wish I could get this level of detail in my writing. Oh, come on, your writing is amazing. Every story is so immersive, it's like my own little movie. I guess, but I can't seem to get any of those details for my last work. I just can't seem to get past this middle part. It's been giving me fits. Well, Madge said, giving me a coy look, maybe you need to use my latest find. Latest find? I asked, not sure what she was talking about. What have you found now? Madge was always trying out new ways to focus and inspire her work. In the time I had known her,
Madge had tried dozens of diets, different workout routines, and mental stimulation techniques, meditation rituals, and all manner of other things. It was admirable. Madge really believed in her work, but it seemed she was always on her latest find. She took me down a hallway and opened a door onto a white room with a large black pod sitting in it. "What is that?" I asked, intrigued. "It's called the egg." It was aptly named. It looked a bit like an egg. It was an egg-shaped metal bed that was fully enclosed and set on a small raised platform. It was the only thing in the room and dominated it completely. I could see a hatch that would open up the top of the egg so that someone could get in, and I wondered what was in that strange container. Water, maybe, or perhaps just a comfortable place to meditate. "It's a sensory deprivation tank," Madge said, "and it's supposed to cut you off from outside stimuli so that you can tap into the most primal part of your inner mind." "Does it work?" "Well, you saw the paintings. You tell me." I put a hand on the outside of the pod and felt how smooth it was. It was metallic smooth, like the smoothness of a dolphin's skin. It was oily and a little slippery, and I wondered how she climbed into this thing without falling down on her ass. I was also intrigued. If this thing could take her work to the level that I'd seen it, then what could it do for me? "Do you want to try it?" Madge asked. "Could I?" She laughed. "Well, of course, silly. I wouldn't have brought you here if I didn't intend to let you try it out." I ran my hand along it again. Did I really want to climb inside the strange metal cocoon? I had to admit that even looking at it was giving me ideas. Just being around it, I felt like I could see where I was going wrong a few chapters in. If I could change those chapters, then the book might progress smoothly, and I could get back to work. That made me wonder what revelations I could discover by climbing inside. I nodded, and Madge unhooked a pair of clasps and tipped the dome up. There were little grooves carved into the side of it, the side that I hadn't seen, and I stepped up and looked into the egg. There was nothing but a cushy seat inside, and as I sat down, I felt incredibly comfortable. The chair was one of those backside devouring numbers, the ones that are like sitting on a cloud. "I'll set the timer for about 30 minutes, Madge said. "But if you feel like you're getting claustrophobic, just bang on the side. I won't go far." I nodded, honestly unsure what to expect, and as the top of the egg came down, it was suddenly cut off from everything. Many of you have probably never experienced true silence. I'm here to tell you that it's pretty weird. There were no lights inside the egg. No sound got in through the cracks. I knew I was inside, but as I reached out to touch it, I couldn't even feel it. We take feeling things with our fingers for granted, but touching the inside of this was like touching nothing. I tried to control my breathing, but it really was feeling a little claustrophobic. I sat back, though, trying to get comfortable as the oppressive darkness crept in on me. It reminded me of the darkness I found in my room when I was a little girl. The door closed, the shadows moving as my imagination ran wild. I blinked, my eyes hungry for light of any kind, and as I did, I became aware that the inside was lighting up. Not a lot. It wasn't one of those let there be light kind of things, but the darkness softened some. It reminded me of the purple darkness that you sometimes see in shows with space travel. I was moving, too, moving forward as if on a rail, and I could see something coming up before me. It was small, a blip on the horizon, but as I got closer, it started to grow. I was traveling at a relative speed, like I was riding in a car or something. And when the outside came into focus, I realized I was looking at a massive door. The door was... I don't know how to describe it, honestly. Eldritch, timeless, elven maybe. Whatever it was, it looked like it had just arrived in space in the early days of anything and set up shop. There were these things etched into the frame, words or symbols that I couldn't understand, and on the front was a word that I could. It was in big letters, the kind that belong in a kid's picture book. The big block letters spelled out inspiration, and I supposed it would have inspired me to write something. I had come to rest at the edge of the little mound of earth it sat upon, and I was surprised to find that I could stand up and walk towards it. It was easily 30 feet high, half again as wide, and the closer I got, the louder the whispers became. I could hear something whispering, the pervasive kind of whispering that you hear in horror movies, and it was coming from the cracks in that massive door. I put my ear to it and began to listen, and it told me a story I had never heard before. I'd already discovered how to get over the hump that was holding me up, but the door gave me a new story as well. It was a better tale than the one I had so diligently worked on, and I felt foolish for ever starting it. This story was a bestseller. A bestseller, if ever there was one. I drank it in like manna, wanting to get all of it, but as it told me the secrets of my next great work, there was suddenly a bright intrusion of light. I felt my eyes screaming and thought that I must surely go blind. The light would cook my brain right out of my head and I'd die right here beside this huge door. But when someone shook me, I opened my eyes slowly as I realized I was still in the egg. "Are you okay? You said 30 minutes. Did you..." She stopped, clearly seeing something on my face that she didn't like. "Are you okay?" I was looking around frantically, not entirely sure what was happening, but as Madge put a hand on my arm to steady me, I came back to myself. I was in her side room, inside this strange object that she had bought for her art. I had been using it to help me with my book. I'd seen the door. I'd heard the story. "It's wild, isn't it?" Madge said, grinning as she helped me climb out. I nodded, but I didn't think she understood how right she was. It was weird going back to life as I'd known it after seeing that door. It was like the door had been some vaguely remembered other life, or like a video game I had played and lived another life through. It faded over me, but what didn't fade was the story it had given me. I went home and immediately set to work on it. It was amazing, something that I had never known, that I wanted until it had been shown to me. I sequestered myself for weeks, furiously writing until I had it all down. But that was when the trouble started. Reading over it, making changes, making edits, I started to see that what I had wasn't right. This wasn't the beautiful story that the door had sung into me. I'd butchered it. This was a chop job, but it was the best I could do. As I went through it, I knew this wouldn't cut it. I needed to do better. The story had actually begun to fade a little in my mind, and I knew that if I wanted this second draft to be as good as it could be, as good as the one the door had whispered to me, I would need to hear it again. Madge laughed when I called her and asked if I could use the egg. "Got a little touch of the old writer's block, do you? That's okay, the egg will fix you up. Come on over tonight. I'll take care of you." She sounded a little funny on the phone, but I didn't realize that at the moment. Her laughter went a little too high, her voice was a little too shrill, and her mood was a little too jolly. She sounded drunk, but that wasn't outside the norm for her. I figured she was celebrating a big piece or a gallery showing and headed over to her place. When she opened the door and welcomed me in, I was, again, pretty sure that she was drunk. She looked rough. Her hair was greasy and unwashed, hanging about her head like a stringy curtain. She wasn't wearing makeup. She had traded her usual sweaters and capri pants for sweats and a baggy t-shirt. She was thinner than I remembered, and I wondered if she'd been eating regularly. If I hadn't been half out of my mind already, I probably would have been more worried. I didn't have time to worry. I needed my story. Glad you're here. You can take a look at the stuff I've been working on. Madge had always been a prolific artist, but now the walls of her living room and dining room were full of new art that she had created. The canvases, well, they were something. Madge's art had always been soft, maybe even a little naive, but this new stuff was like cave paintings. They were charcoal and dark smears of what might have been feces. They were like the magic pictures I had seen in books as a kid. The pictures were shapes and odd formations, but once you saw it, it was impossible not to see. "They're so good," she said, the sound of her lighter very loud as she lit a cigarette. "These are so different from anything I've ever done." "Have you got a buyer yet?" I asked, a little awestruck. "I bet you could sell these for a—" "Sell them?" Madge sounded scandalized. "These are my babies. Oh, no. These are gifts from my muse, from the egg." "From the door?" I asked, and Madge looked at me like she had never seen me before. "You've seen it too," she whispered. She sounded like she was afraid to wake it up. It gave me my new story. That's why I'm here, Madge. I need to see it again. I need this second draft to be amazing. I need it to be perfect." "Are you going to give it to your editor?" I started to say that of course I would, but I couldn't. Why hadn't I given my first draft to my editor yet? I was so worried about this book being perfect, but now I was curious why I hadn't shared it with my editor. Why hadn't I shared it with Madge, for that matter? I'd always shared things with her, but it had never even occurred to me with this one. That should have been a second tip-off, but like I said, I was hungry for my story. "I need to use the egg," I said, and she nodded as she took me to the little room. It was different now. It had been pristine before, but now the floor was littered with refuse. Chip bags, soda cans, the leavings of old meals, all the trappings of a life lived behind the door, or inside the egg. "Sorry," she said sheepishly. "I should have cleaned up a little. I knew you were coming, but I just... It's fine," I said, putting her mind at ease. "I came over spur of the moment." She opened the egg, and I was hit with the smell of old sweat and unwashed skin. I had to wonder if Madge had been living in this thing, and as I climbed in, I had to hold my breath as the smell wafted over me. It was intense, but that was the price of doing business. If I wanted the book, then I would have to pay the toll. "How long do you want?" she asked, and she sounded hesitant to close the bubble. She sounded like she might like very much to climb in with me. "Give me an hour," I said, and Madge nodded as she closed the shell behind me. As the shell closed, the smell encased me. It didn't last long. It was soon enveloped in that all-encompassing silence as I drifted away. I opened my eyes to find that I was once more floating through the darkness, flying towards the door again. I was moving closer, the door rising before me. It was as huge as I remembered it, and the runes still marking the outside. As I approached the crack between the door and the jamb, I started hearing the whispers again. I listened, I refreshed myself, and I heard what I had forgotten. I knew how to make it great. I knew how it could be completed. I listened again and again, like a child hearing their favorite bedtime story. But over time, the story began to change. It changed, and it expanded. The door told me many stories, so many that my mind began to spin. It was too much. I shouldn't have done more than 30 minutes. The stories were too much. I was getting too much. My head was going to explode. Madge was going to clean me out of this thing when I was done, popping like a grape. I could feel the veins thrumming on the side of my head, and I just knew that any minute, any second, I was going to... The light, the all-enveloping light, was suddenly filling my eyes when Madge opened the egg. I threw my arms around her and hugged her tightly. Thank you. God, thank you. Madge didn't hug me back. Instead, she started trying to push me out of the egg. I was a little bigger than her, so it was hard to manage, but as I got the hint and climbed out, Madge climbed in and grabbed the edge of the shell. I need to be back in, she mumbled before the lid slammed shut. You've been in there long enough. It's my turn. She pulled it shut behind her, and it was the last time I ever saw her. I tried to get the lid up, wanted to warn her, but there must have been some kind of latch on the inside or something. I couldn't get it open, and I couldn't get her to come out, so finally I just went home to finish my book. It's perfect now. There's no gaps or problems with it. It's as good as I can make it, and that is as close to perfect as it'll ever be. Madge still hasn't called me. I don't think she ever will. I'm looking at the finished manuscript, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Every time I think about sending it to my editor, I get this overwhelming feeling of anxiety that I just can't do it. Maybe someday when the constant ring round the rosy of stories stops spinning around my brain. But not today. I'm afraid of the egg, afraid of what it could do to me. But I'm also tempted to go purchase my own. I suppose then Madge and I can have matching coffins when they find us dead within the egg.